I retired at 64 and bought a 40-acre farm in the Blue Ridge foothills of western North Carolina so I could finally breathe air that didn't smell like metal shavings and exhaust. 35 years as a master electrician had left me with 2 bad knees, 1 good savings account, and a bone-deep craving for silence. I found it on Cutter's Creek Road, where the only sounds after dark were the creek itself and the occasional screech owl working the back field. Then my daughter-in-law called and told me her brother's family would be moving into the farmhouse with me. She didn't ask. She informed me. And when I didn't answer right away, she said, "It's either that or sell the place, Robert. You don't need 40 acres at your age." I didn't argue. I thanked her for calling and hung up the phone. But I'd spent 35 years planning circuits, and I already knew exactly how this one was going to run. The closing had happened on a Wednesday in April. Margaret Foley, the attorney handling the property transfer, slid the deed across her desk like she was handing me something sacred, and maybe she was $285,000. Every dollar I'd put aside while my colleagues were buying boats and adding rooms onto houses they didn't own outright. I signed my name the way I'd signed work orders for 3 decades, careful and certain. The drive out from Asheville took 40 minutes on roads that got prettier the worse they got. By the time I hit the gravel stretch of Cutter's Creek Road, I'd lost cell service entirely. And I found I didn't miss it at all. The farmhouse sat back from the road behind a row of white oaks that had been there longer than anyone alive could remember. 2 stories, wide porch, stone chimney on the south end. The barn out back was sound. The fencing needed work. The creek ran cold and clear along the eastern property line. I sat on the porch steps that first evening with a cup of coffee and watched a red fox pick its way across the far field like it had all the time in the world. I called my son Kyle from the landline the previous owners had left connected. He answered on the first ring. "You make it okay, Dad?" "Sitting on the porch right now. You should see this place in the evening light." He laughed. And it was the easy laugh I remembered from before he'd married Amber 4 years ago, before things got complicated. "You earned it, Dad. Nobody's earned something more than you've earned that farm." We talked for 20 minutes. His job at the bank, my plans for the backfield, whether the old tractor in the barn was worth fixing. Easy conversation. When we hung up, I sat there until the stars came out and felt something I'd been chasing for years finally catch up to me. The call from my daughter-in-law came 8 days later. I was in the barn, assessing the tractor, when my cell connected just long enough to push through a voicemail notification. I called back from the landline when I got inside. She answered before the second ring. "Robert." Her voice had a particular quality when she wanted something, clipped and bright at the same time, like a door being held open with a foot rather than a hand. "I'm glad you picked up. I need to talk to you about Derek." Her brother. I'd met him 3 times at family gatherings, and each time had come away with the same impression. A man who believed the world owed him a specific debt and was irritated it hadn't paid up yet. He was 38, and as far as I could tell, he'd held exactly 1 job in the last 5 years. A 6-month stretch, selling insurance, that ended badly. "What about him?" I said. "He and Tina and the kids need somewhere to stay. Their landlord sold the house out from under them, and they have nowhere to go." She paused. "Kyle and I talked about it, and we think your farmhouse is the perfect solution. You have 4 bedrooms, Robert. You're 1 person." I set down the mug I was holding very carefully. "Amber. It's not permanent. Just until they get back on their feet. 3 months. Maybe 4. How many people are we talking about?" "Derek and Tina and their 2 boys. They're well-behaved kids, Robert. This isn't a burden. It's family helping family." There it was. I'd been waiting for it. Family, helping family, which in practice meant me absorbing someone else's chaos because I had square footage to absorb it with. Did Kyle agree to this? Kyle understands that we have to step up when family needs us. Her voice cooled slightly. Unlike some people who sit alone on 40 acres and don't think about anyone but themselves. I looked out the kitchen window at the white oaks. 8 days. I'd had 8 days. "When were you planning to have them arrive?" "Next weekend. I'll text you the details. And Robert, please, don't make this into a thing. Derek and Tina are good people in a hard situation. If you can't find it in yourself to help your own family, then maybe this farm isn't really what you need right now. Maybe you should think about coming back to Charlotte where people can keep an eye on you." She hung up. I stood at the kitchen window for a long time after that. The creek was running high from 2 days of rain. A pair of wood ducks drifted past on the far bank. My hands were steady. They'd learned to be steady over 35 years of working inside live electrical panels, and I wasn't going to let my daughter-in-law unlearn that now. I went to the kitchen table, opened a legal pad, and started writing. The first call I made the next morning was to the Yancey County Planning Office. I asked about regulations regarding primary residences versus multifamily occupancy, and what the county required when additional adults took up residence on a single-family property for extended periods. The clerk was patient and thorough. I took 3 pages of notes. When she mentioned that homeowners' insurance policies often had specific language about unregistered occupants and liability exposure, I thanked her and made my second call. My insurance agent in Charlotte had handled my policies for 22 years. I explained the situation without drama, just facts, and asked what my coverage looked like if non-family members sustained injuries on my property while staying without a formal rental agreement. He walked me through it carefully. Unauthorized long-term guests created genuine liability exposure. Any incident, a fall on the porch steps, a kid getting hurt near the creek, a vehicle accident on the property, could result in a claim denial. You'd essentially be running an unlicensed boarding house, he said. That's a different product than what you have. Good to know, I said. I just want to be thorough. Robert, in 22 years, you've never once called me asking hypotheticals. What's actually going on? Due diligence, I said. You know me. He did, and I let him think that's all it was. 2 days later, I drove into Burnsville, the county seat, and found the office of Hendricks and Coles, a small firm that had been on the main street long enough that their sign was faded at the edges. The attorney I met with, a woman named Carol Webb, who'd grown up in the county and had the direct manner of someone who'd seen every variety of rural property dispute, listened to my situation without interrupting. So your daughter-in-law has informed you, without your agreement, that her brother's family is arriving next Saturday to move in. That's correct, and your son hasn't contacted you directly about this. He called once, 2 days ago. He said he hoped I'd keep an open mind. That was the phrase, like he was reading it. Carol nodded slowly. Mr. Calloway, you have absolute legal standing to refuse entry to anyone you choose. This is your property, deeded solely in your name. You have no obligation to house your daughter-in-law's relatives. What if they show up anyway and refuse to leave? Then you have a trespass situation. Call the Yancey County Sheriff's Office. Document everything before they arrive, during, and after. She pulled out a yellow pad. I'd also recommend a written notice ready to hand them the moment they arrive if they do come despite your refusal. Clear, polite, and unambiguous. It creates a paper record. I hired her that afternoon, paid the retainer by check, got a receipt, and drove back to the farm, feeling the particular calm that comes from having a solid plan and the right tools to execute it. That evening I called Kyle. He sounded tired before I said a word. Dad, I was going to call you. I know about her brother Kyle. A silence. Background sounds. A TV. Amber's voice, somewhere distant, and then quieter. Dad, I know it's a lot to ask, but they really are in a tough spot. And Amber is, did you agree to this? Before she called me, did you tell her it was okay to call me and tell me Derek's family was moving in? Another silence. Longer this time. She said she was going to talk to you about it. She didn't talk to me about it. She told me it was happening. There's a difference, son. I heard him breathe. I know there's a difference. His voice dropped. I'll talk to her. You don't need to talk to her on my behalf. I'm telling you, my answer is no. I bought this farm for my retirement. I worked 35 years for it, and I'm not going to hand it over to people I barely know because it's inconvenient to find another solution. Dad, I love you, Kyle, but no means no. I slept well that night. The screech owl was back, working the field behind the barn, and the creek was still running high, and I lay in the dark, listening to it, and felt entirely clear. They showed up on Saturday anyway. The motion sensor I'd mounted on the fence post at the road sent an alert to my phone at 2:14 inches the afternoon. I watched the feed from the porch. A pickup truck with a trailer hitched behind it came slowly up the gravel drive. Furniture visible under a blue tarp. Boxes in the truck bed. My daughter-in-law's brother was driving. His wife Tina in the passenger seat. 2 boys visible in the back. They'd packed a moving trailer. They hadn't come to ask. They'd come to move in. I walked down off the porch and met them at the bottom of the steps. My daughter-in-law's brother got out with the easy confidence of a man who believed this was already settled. He was broad-shouldered, younger than he looked in photographs, with the handshake of someone who'd learned that a firm grip could substitute for a lot of other things. "Robert, good to finally get out here. Amber talks about this place all the time." He looked past me at the farmhouse with that same expression I'd seen before on the faces of people calculating value, bigger than I expected. "Derek," I said, "this isn't going to work the way you've planned." His wife had gotten out, ushering the 2 boys to one side. She had the look of someone who'd been bracing for this and still hoped it wouldn't be necessary. "Amber said you were on board," Derek said. His voice shifted slightly, not quite confrontational yet, but tightening. "Amber was wrong. I never agreed to this. I told her no. I told Kyle no. And I'm telling you no now. Directly. In person. So there's no room for misunderstanding. We drove 4 hours. I understand that. And I'm sorry the trip was wasted. But I'm not going to allow you to move into my property. This is my home, and I'm the only one who gets to decide who lives here." Derek stepped forward. Not aggressive, but the kind of forward step that's meant to make a point about size and intention. "Look, let's be reasonable here. You've got 4 bedrooms. You're one person. We're not asking for charity. We're family. Amber is your daughter-in-law. That makes us connected. It makes your sister my daughter-in-law. That's the extent of our connection. I've met you 3 times, Derek. I don't know you. I don't owe you my home." His face colored. Tina put her hand on his arm and said something quietly. He shook it off. "You know what, Robert? Amber warned us you'd be like this. Said you were always the difficult one in the family. Selfish. Amber's going to have a lot to say about this. Amber can say whatever she wants. The answer is no. I need you to turn around and leave my property now." I held up the envelope I was carrying. "If you choose not to, this is a written notice of trespass. I have an attorney and the sheriff's number saved in my phone." Tina was already herding the boys back toward the truck. She looked at me once, and there was something in her face that wasn't anger. It was closer to exhaustion and maybe something like relief, though she'd never have admitted it. Derek stared at me for a long moment. "You're going to regret this. Please leave my property." He left. I went inside, made coffee, and sat at the table reviewing the footage on my phone. Every moment captured. Timestamps, clear audio, faces visible. I sent the files to Carol Webb's email before I'd finished my first cup. The retaliation started the following Tuesday. A letter arrived from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services indicating a wellness check had been requested for a resident on Cutters Creek Road. An anonymous caller had reported concerns about an elderly man living alone in deteriorating conditions. Possible signs of cognitive decline, possible hoarding. I called Carol Webb from the landline. "This is a tactic," she said, with the flat certainty of someone who'd seen it before. "I've dealt with this pattern twice in the past 3 years. Family members who can't get what they want through direct pressure sometimes use social services as a lever. The investigation will clear you. Your home is clearly well-maintained, and you're clearly competent. What we need to do is document this as the opening move in a pattern of harassment. Can we find out who filed it? The report is anonymous officially, but there are ways to establish origin if it continues. Stay calm, Frank. Let the investigation happen. You have nothing to hide." She caught herself. "Sorry, Robert." "You're fine," I said. "I've been called worse." The caseworker who arrived Thursday morning was a young man named Terrence. Professional, unhurried, with the careful neutrality of someone trained not to show conclusions before they'd finished drawing them. I gave him a full tour. The farmhouse was clean and organized. My finances were in order. My medicine cabinet contained a blood pressure pill and a multivitamin. I'd been cooking my own meals since 1987, and I showed him the well-stocked pantry to prove it. Mr. Calloway, I'm required to ask, is there any current family conflict that might have motivated this report? My daughter-in-law wanted her brother's family to move in without my permission. I refused. They came anyway, and I turned them away. She threatened consequences. I believe this report is one of them. Terrence wrote for a long time. The report was filed from an IP address registered to a cellular carrier in the Charlotte metro area, which I'm not supposed to share, but I'll tell you anyway because this is the third fraudulent wellness check I've investigated this year and I'm tired of it. He closed his notebook. The investigation will reflect that you're living safely and independently in excellent condition. I'll note the circumstances in my report. Thank you, Terrence. Thank you for the coffee. That's real cream, isn't it? I don't see the point of the other kind. He laughed on his way out. By the end of the week, the wellness investigation was closed. Unfounded, as Carol had predicted. But I knew my daughter-in-law wouldn't stop here. She never stopped, according to Kyle. She escalated. She always escalated. So I did the thing I'd learned to do with complicated electrical problems. I hired someone to trace the full circuit before it shorted. I called a private investigator in Asheville whose name Carol had given me. Her name was Paulette Odom, and she had the methodical efficiency of a former claims adjuster, which is exactly what she'd been for 17 years before going independent. $400 for a standard background package, she said. What are you looking for? Everything. Start with Derek and Tina. Then circle back to my daughter-in-law. The report on Derek arrived 4 days later by encrypted email. I printed it and read it at the kitchen table while the evening came in through the windows. Derek had 2 civil judgments against him in the past 6 years. A contractor dispute from 2019 for $22,000 in unpaid work on a commercial property he'd claimed to own and didn't. A landlord suit from 2021 for $14,000 in back rent and property damage. More relevant, a 2022 conviction for check fraud in Mecklenburg County, a misdemeanor that had been pled down from a felony, resulting in 18 months of probation that ended last spring. I set that page aside and picked up the next one. This one was about my daughter-in-law. She had been terminated from her position at a Charlotte marketing firm 7 months ago. She hadn't told Kyle. She'd been depositing money into their joint checking account monthly in amounts consistent with her former salary. But Paulette had traced the source. A line of credit taken out in Kyle's name 8 months ago, without his knowledge, using documents Paulette described as signatures inconsistent with normal account opening procedures, which was a careful way of saying forgery. The line of credit balance was $67,000. I sat with that number for a very long time. Kyle didn't know he was $67,000 in debt. He didn't know his wife had forged his signature. He didn't know that the brother-in-law he'd been defending was a convicted fraudster. He didn't know any of it because no one had told him. I thought about my son, about the boy who'd handed me tools in the crawl space under our first house when he was 9 years old, who'd stayed up late in high school helping me study for my master electrician exam, even though it was my exam and not his. I thought about how tired he'd sounded on the phone. I thought about the phrase, keep an open mind, and what it costs a person to say something they don't believe. I picked up the phone. I need you to come up here, I said when he answered. Alone. This weekend. There's something you need to see. He arrived Friday evening, later than expected, apologizing when he got out of the car for the traffic on I-40. He looked thin. He looked tired in the same way he'd looked tired the last 2 times I'd seen him, like a man carrying something he couldn't put down. We sat on the porch with beers and watched the bats come out over the backfield. And for a while, we didn't talk about anything that mattered. She knows I'm here, he said. Eventually, I figured. She asked me to talk to you. About reconsidering. He looked at his hands. She thinks if I explain the situation better, about Derek and Tina and the kids. Kyle. I set down my beer. How's your savings account looking? He went still. Your retirement account. Your emergency fund. What's the balance? A long silence. The creek was quiet tonight, running low after a dry week. We had to pull from savings a few months ago, he said. Amber's hours got cut at work. It was a rough stretch. Her hours got cut, I said slowly. Yeah. Things have been tight. I went inside and got the folder from the kitchen drawer where I'd been keeping it. I sat back down beside him and handed him the first page. He read it without speaking. Then the second page. Then the third. When he got to the line of credit document, I heard him stop breathing for a moment. This is in my name, he said. Yes. I didn't sign this. I know. He stood up and walked to the porch railing and stood there with his back to me, and I let him have the time he needed. An owl called from the white oaks. Somewhere down on the road, a truck passed, its headlights swinging briefly through the trees. She wasn't laid off, he said. She was fired. Yes. 7 months ago. Yes. And she's been pulling money from a credit line she opened in my name to make it look like she still had income. That's what the documents indicate. Dad. His voice broke on the word. Just slightly. He caught it. $67,000. I know, son. That was supposed to be the down payment on a house. We've been saving for 3 years. I thought we had it. I thought we were close. He turned around, and I could see his face in the porch light. And what was on it wasn't just grief. It was the particular expression of a man who has just had something important clarified. She was going to use your farm, wasn't she? Derek and Tina moving in. That wasn't really about Derek. She wanted them here, so she had leverage, so she could claim some kind of interest in the property. I hadn't told him that part yet. But my son was a smart man. Paulette thinks there may have been a longer game, I said carefully. Something about establishing a pattern of financial contribution to the property that could later support a claim. I don't know the specifics, but Carol Webb is looking into it. Kyle came back and sat down. He didn't pick up his beer. He just sat there for a long time. You hired people, he said finally. An attorney, a PI. You did all this while she was trying to get you investigated for what did she say? Cognitive decline? Something moved across his face that was close to a broken laugh. I've been building circuits my whole life. You make sure every component is where it belongs before you run power through it. He looked at me. Why didn't you just tell me? When she first called you, why didn't you call me right then and say, Kyle, your wife just told me to house her brother or sell my farm because I wanted you to come to the truth on your own terms, and I wanted to have something concrete to show you when you got there. Telling you your wife was lying to you without evidence would have put you in the middle of a he said, she said situation. This, I touched the folder, removes the middle. He was quiet for a long time. I gave Derek money, he said. Amber asked me to. Said it was a short-term loan, that they'd pay it back. I wired them $6,000 in February. I didn't know that. It was my money. He looked at his hands again. Or I thought it was my money. Now I don't know whose money anything is. He took a long, slow breath. I need to go home and talk to her. I know. I don't know what I'm going to do after that. You don't have to know tonight. He looked out at the field and the dark tree line beyond it, and didn't say anything for a while. When he spoke, his voice was steadier. Thank you for not pretending this wasn't happening. Some fathers would have just kept the peace. Let it go. He looked at me, not told me. You're my son, I said. The only thing I owe you is the truth. He left Sunday morning. I watched his taillights disappear down the gravel road, and then I went inside and poured the cold coffee from yesterday down the sink and made a fresh pot. My daughter-in-law made 2 more attempts in the weeks that followed. The first was a letter from a Charlotte attorney claiming that money she had contributed to the ongoing maintenance of the property at Cutters Creek Road entitled her to a partial ownership interest. Carol Webb read it and set it on her desk and said, She has contributed exactly nothing to this property and she can document exactly nothing. This is a nuisance filing. We'll respond, which will cost her attorney time and her money, and then it will go away. It went away in 11 days. The second attempt was a call to the Yancey County Zoning Board, claiming my property was being operated as an illegal short-term rental. It was investigated and dismissed in 6 days. I'd never rented a single square foot of the property to anyone. Kyle called me after the zoning board notice. He sounded different, cleaner, somehow, like a signal that had been running through a bad connection had finally found the right path. She admitted the credit line, he said. When I showed her the documents, she said she was going to pay it back before I noticed, and that I was overreacting. What did you say? I told her that forging my signature on a $67,000 loan is not something a person pays back and moves on from. A pause. I asked her to leave. I didn't say anything for a moment. Her attorney has already been in contact with mine. It's going to be complicated. Forensic accountant says there may be another $20,000 in debt I don't know about yet. It's going to take a while to untangle. His voice was calm. Not the flat calm of suppressed feeling, but something realer. I called the attorney who sent that letter about the property interest. Told him if they filed anything against your farm, I'd testify in detail about every document in that folder. He dropped her as a client the next day. You protected the farm. You protected me first. We didn't talk for a while. Just the connection between us and the creek outside my window. Come up next weekend, I said. The walleye are running. Winter came slowly that year, which is how it comes to the Blue Ridge. First, the maples turned, then the oaks, and by November, the hills around the farm were the color of embers. I split wood for the fireplace and worked on the fencing along the back field and took long walks along the creek in the mornings with coffee in a thermos. Kyle came up most weekends. Sometimes he helped with the fencing. Sometimes he just sat on the porch with a book and a blanket and didn't do anything at all, and I understood the value of that better than most people. The divorce finalized in February. It was as complicated as he'd predicted and cost him more than it should have. The forensic accountant found the additional debt, $23,000 this time, buried in a business account she'd opened using his Social Security number. She'd also applied for a home equity loan on the apartment they'd been renting, which the bank had declined but which had left a hard inquiry on his credit that would take years to fully clear. Derek and Tina, as best I could determine, were renting a single wide in a park outside Charlotte. Derek was back in insurance. I didn't follow it closely. My daughter-in-law had moved into a rental in the same neighborhood she'd grown up in. Kyle said she seemed fine, which was the most charitable thing he could find to say, and I thought that was about right. Spring came back to the farm the way it always does in the mountains, reluctant and then sudden and then everywhere at once. The creek ran full again. The wood ducks came back to the far bank. I planted a vegetable garden along the south side of the barn, something I'd wanted to do for 30 years and kept not having time for. Kyle called one Thursday in April with a different quality to his voice, lighter, the way he'd sounded before everything got difficult. I want to come up this weekend. Bring someone. I let the silence sit for a moment. Someone. Her name is Grace. She works in our mortgage department. I've been talking to her for about 3 months and I think you should meet her. Does she fish? He laughed. I have no idea. I didn't ask. Ask, he asked. She didn't, but she was willing to learn, which I'd found was usually the better answer anyway. They arrived Saturday afternoon in Kyle's truck. Grace got out and shaded her eyes against the sun and looked at the farm the way I'd looked at it the first time, taking it all in before saying anything. Then she turned to me and said, Kyle told me you wired your first house yourself when you were 26. I did. He says you're the most methodical person he's ever known. I take that as a compliment. He meant it as one. Her handshake was firm. She had the direct manner of someone comfortable with her own opinions, and I thought that was a good sign. We spent the afternoon on the creek bank with fishing rods, and she was, as predicted, not particularly good at it. But she was patient and curious, and asked smart questions, and when she finally got a strike and nearly dropped the rod in the water, she laughed at herself before she did anything else. I thought about what that meant. A person who can laugh at themselves in front of people they're trying to impress. It meant they'd decided the impression they wanted to make was an honest one. That evening, we grilled trout on the deck, and Kyle told the story of the first time I'd taken him fishing on this same stretch of creek, back when it was still somebody else's property and we were just trespassing with permission from the previous owner. An old man named Garland who'd charged me 2 jars of jam per fishing season and considered it a fair price. Grace laughed at all the right places in the story. When Kyle finished telling it, she looked at me and said, "He talks about you a lot, you know, about what you did last year, about the farm, and the way you handled everything. I didn't do anything remarkable. I just didn't say yes when I meant no. Most people can't do that when it's someone they love on the other side of it." Kyle looked at me across the table. "He's always been able to do that. It's the thing I'm still learning." After dinner, Grace walked down to the creek to look at the water in the evening light, and Kyle and I sat in the deck chairs and watched the last color drain out of the sky behind the ridge. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think she's her own person." "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. "That's what I think too." "Then keep going." He smiled. "The real kind. The kind that came from somewhere that hadn't been touched by the last 2 years." A year later, on a clear Saturday in October, with the maples at full fire along the creek, Kyle and Grace got married in the side yard of the farmhouse. Grace's family came from Virginia, a loud and cheerful group who arrived with 3 casseroles and a dog. Kyle's friends from the bank filled the rest of the chairs. I gave a toast that made Grace's mother cry and made Kyle pretend not to. At the end of the evening, after most of the guests had gone and the caterers were loading up and the dog was asleep under the porch, Kyle found me at the fence line at the back of the property, looking at the field in the dark. "You okay, Dad?" "Better than okay." He leaned on the fence beside me. The creek was talking quietly down at the property line. Somewhere in the dark across the field, an owl was working. "Grace wants to talk to you about something," he said. "Not tonight, when things settle down. But she's been thinking about it for a while and she wanted me to tell you so you weren't blindsided." I looked at him. "We want kids," he said, "sooner rather than later. And we want them to know this place, to spend time here." She grew up in suburban Virginia, sidewalks and subdivisions, and she loves it here in a way I don't think either of us expected. He paused. "She said she wants her kids to learn to fish where their grandfather fishes." I had to look back out at the field for a moment. "I'd like that," I said. "So would I." He put his hand on my shoulder the way I'd put mine on his shoulder at many different points in his life, a grip that was both gentle and sure. "Thank you, Dad, for the farm, for standing your ground when everyone was telling you not to, for being the kind of father who shows up with a folder of evidence instead of a lecture." "The folder was more useful," he laughed. "It really was." We stood there at the back fence in the dark for a while longer, listening to the creek and the owl and the sound of Grace saying goodbye to the last guests up near the house, her voice carrying clear across the yard. The farm had cost me $285,000 and 35 years of brown bag lunches. What I'd built since on the same ground was worth considerably more than that. A son who trusted me, a daughter-in-law who respected me, and the quiet knowledge that the thing people call peace isn't about acreage or silence at all. It's about having the people you love close enough to hear across a dark yard on a clear October night. I patted my son on the shoulder and walked back toward the lights of the house. If this story meant something to you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment and let me know what time it is where you're watching from. And when you're ready for the next story, it's waiting for you in the box right there. Thank you for listening.